She was intelligent, ambitious, and well-respected. But behind closed doors, Meredith Sullivan Chapman was not the lady her resume described. What appeared to be ambition and leadership was actually a perilous fixation that would lead to a tragic end. Meredith had it all: a successful job as a communications professor, a political reputation, and a promising future. But none of this was sufficient. The same woman who stood on podiums preaching professionalism was covertly developing a romance with her new assistant, Mark Gerardo, a guy nearly 2 decades older, married, and allegedly devoted to his wife of 25 years. Mark wasn't only a co-worker, he was her employee. Hired to head marketing under Meredith's direction, he relocated from out of state, leaving his long-term wife, Jenna, behind to conclude their relocation. Meredith recognized the ideal opportunity and seized it. She brought Mark out for drinks only 2 weeks after he arrived. That night did not conclude in the bar, and it wasn't simply a mistake. It was the start of something they both knew would go too far. Meredith did not hesitate. While her husband, Luke Chapman, was still living under the same roof, she threw caution to the breeze. She and Mark began seeing each other in secret, while Jenna, who was still in another state, was unaware that her husband was already forging a life with someone else. It wasn't about love, but about control. Meredith was aware of her emotional, as well as professional, influence. And Mark, he fell for it. Even after Jenna relocated to the new city and joined her husband, Meredith continued the affair. She knew Jenna was present. She was aware that the issue was complex. She didn't care. Her goal was to win. Mark attempted to pull away once, but Meredith refused to let go. She drew him back in, and he ran. Meredith ultimately informed her husband that it was over. A smooth divorce. There's no drama. There are no questions. She was free now. What about Mark? Still married, still twisted, still lying. Nevertheless, Meredith did not wait. She resigned from her job, moved into a new house, and gave Mark a position beside her, not only romantically, but professionally as well. He followed. Jenna saw everything shatter. However, that was not the entire tale. Jenna wasn't just a dumb wife sitting quietly in the background. She noticed the signals. She followed the motions. She collected the proof. Jenna was watching while Meredith and Mark played home. She recognized the pubs they frequented, the apartment they occupied, and the time they spent together as she waited alone in a new city with no job, family, or future. On Valentine's Day, Jenna approached Mark. He denied it, of course, promised to cease. They promised to mend things. He returned to Meredith a few days later. However, lies on top of lies. And Jenna? She snapped. What occurred next would rock everyone to their core. Jenna wasn't blind, just patient. While Mark told anecdotes and played the adoring spouse in public, she was already 2 steps ahead. When she hired a private investigator, her suspicions became to certainties. What she discovered would cause anyone's blood to run cold. Photos, locations, times, proof, everything was there. Mark wasn't just cheating. He was creating a second life, slipping off to secret meets with Meredith and lying about late work nights, while Jenna waited alone in a city she never wanted to live in. She sacrificed everything for him. So this was her reward? She did not shout. She did not beg. She collected evidence. Jenna monitored his every step using GPS devices, malware on his phone, and even tracking software on their home computer. The more she learned, the clearer it became. This wasn't a fling. This was a high-level treachery. And Mark? He lied directly to her face. When Jenna eventually confronted him, he looked her in the eyes and denied everything. Not once, but again, even with photographs in her hands. He informed her that she was hallucinating things, that she was paranoid, that she needed assistance. And when she wouldn't back down, he promised to terminate it. But it was a promise he never planned to fulfill. Within days, he was back in Meredith's arms. More secret meetings, more fabricated reasons. And Jenna? She knew. She was watching. She listened. And she waited. Because, while Mark was busy playing house with his younger employer, Jenna was plotting something far more serious. Jenna Gerardo waited, watched, and plotted until April 23, 2018, when she made her move. It was not a breakdown. It was a decision. Calculated, cold, and irrevocable. That day, Jenna arrived in Meredith's peaceful Pennsylvania neighborhood before anybody noticed. She parked a block away in a black Chevrolet while disguised. Nobody questioned the automobile. Nobody recognized the lady beneath the wig. But Jenna understood precisely what she was doing. She had been studying their pattern for days, waiting for the right opportunity. And now it had arrived. She forced her way into the house through a back window, without hesitation or second thoughts. Inside, everything appeared to be quiet. But Jenna was not there to discuss. She'd brought a weapon. When Meredith entered through the door alone, utterly unsuspecting, Jenna was there waiting. Within seconds, the hush broke. One deadly shot, then another. Meredith Sullivan, once a rising actress with a faultless image, vanished suddenly, all because she crossed the wrong lady. But Jenna was not done. Minutes later, she turned the pistol on herself, creating a horrific scene that stunned everyone who knew them. And yet, the most frightening aspect was not the act itself. It was the lengths she took to make it happen. The inquiry revealed unexpected twist. Mark arrived anticipating supper and celebration. It was meant to be a new beginning, new employment, new city, new life with Meredith. But instead, he strolled in quiet. The type of silence that causes your chest to clench before you open the door. The lights were on. Meredith's automobile was in the driveway. But something seemed odd. Meredith would never make such a foolish error as leaving the front door open. Then comes the smell, the type that stops you in your tracks. When Mark walked into the kitchen, he witnessed something that would haunt him forever. 2 corpses, 2 ladies. A horrific scene. Meredith, the lady he had left everything behind for, lay motionless on the floor. Jenna, the wife he had betrayed, had also left. Blood saturated the tile. The room seemed frozen in time, and Mark's voice broke as he cried for assistance. But it was too late. Police and paramedics came within minutes. At first, they had no idea what to make of it. A guy stuck between 2 ladies, both of whom have since died in the same house. It didn't take long for murmurs to begin. Was this a complicated love triangle gone wrong? Was Mark hiding something? However, detectives were fast to follow the evidence. The gun was discovered beneath Jenna's body. Hers were the only prints on it. There were no evidence of a struggle or a second individual present. Surveillance, phone records, and timings all pointed to the same conclusion. Jenna entered the residence alone and committed the act alone. Legally, Mark was fine. He was not charged. He was not even kept overnight. The case was concluded just days later, with no suspects left. Although he was not found guilty by the law, this does not necessarily imply that he was innocent, because as you delve further, it becomes more difficult to let him off the hook. This was not just an unfortunate coincidence. This was a tragedy that began long before Jenna entered the house. Mark had lied to his wife, duped her, and given her false hope while maintaining a covert relationship with another lady. And as Jenna tried to rescue what was left, he shoved her away again. He informed her that it was over. He promised he would cease. Then he kept going behind her back. He made his decision, and when everything got out of control, he was the only one left standing. So, yes, Mark did not pull the trigger. But consider this. Would one of those ladies have died if he hadn't taken both sides? However, his subsequent actions raised questions about his culpability. This was hardly a crime of passion. It was a mission, carefully planned, arranged, and carried out with chilling precision. Jenna didn't just snap. She planned everything out step by step. Weeks before the big day, she leased a car under a new name, purchased a wig, and began following their every move. Morning rituals, work schedules, dining habits. She knew when they were leaving, when they would return home, and when Meredith would be alone. Neighbors reportedly admitted to seeing a lady sitting in a black Chevrolet parked near the home. Nobody thought much of it, just another face blending in. But it was the masquerade. That was Jenna. She went through the neighborhood like a ghost, watching, waiting, and fitting in. Every night, she returned home to the same stillness Mark had left her in as he experimented with his new lifestyle. Every day, she gathered additional information. This was not an emotional meltdown. It was a strategy. She even practiced. Authorities eventually discovered evidence, handwritten notes, timestamps, and GPS data that demonstrated how long she had been planning. She had even studied the layout of the house, determining where to enter and how to avoid being noticed. By April 23rd, she was not lost or bewildered. She was locked in. Despite her efforts to conceal her behavior, one detail remained unnoticed. Everything about this case was a disaster. But it wasn't only the affair or the violence that caused people to pause. It was what happened thereafter. A life insurance policy was buried among the paperwork. $500,000. What about the name identified as the only beneficiary? Luke Chapman is Meredith's ex-husband. She'd left the man she'd emotionally checked out years earlier. He remained financially committed to her final chapter, rather than emotionally. The policy had been in effect since before their divorce. And, like many others, Meredith never updated the information. Perhaps she forgot. Perhaps she didn't believe it mattered. Perhaps she didn't anticipate her life to end in such a violent, public way. A man who had not been in her daily life for years was poised to earn a $500,000 award simply because his name had not been erased. Investigators did not disregard the red signal. With so much money at stake and so many agendas already entwined in the tale, they had to investigate more. Was Luke aware of this policy? Had he kept track of Meredith and Mark's relationship? Could he have contacted Jenna? Detectives looked through phone logs, emails, and travel histories. They searched for any evidence linking Luke to the crime. Nothing turned up. No strange calls. There are no hidden messages. No touch with Jenna. There was no indication that he was aware of what was about to happen. He was cleared legally, but publicly, it was a different story. People were not convinced. Online forums erupted with conjecture. Was it truly an accident that he never tried to amend the policy after the divorce? Was it conceivable that he had secretly planned to gain from Meredith's murder without raising a finger? And when her bereaved family called out, heartbroken, stunned, and barely holding it together, they only asked Luke one thing: return the money. Not all of it, just enough to cover burial expenses and preserve Meredith's legacy. Luke declined. No apologies. There is no compromise. He kept the money, cold, clean, and according to the book. Her parents filed a lawsuit, aiming to recoup at least some of what they claimed was never intended for him. The court finally ordered him to refund only 10% of his payment. Only a quarter. What about the rest? He got to keep. The judge insisted there was no evil intent. Luke did not exploit the policy or scheme for profit, but that didn't affect how I felt. Meredith had emotionally abandoned a guy years ago, and he now walks away with $500,000, while the people who actually loved her are left with ashes and legal files. It did not set well with anyone. Not her family, not the general public, not the community that previously revered them as a power couple. But as everyone looked to Luke for answers, the real storm was just beginning. Because Mark Gerardo, in the heart of it all, was about to take a step forward. What he did next would send shockwaves through everyone who believed the tale had ended. Just months after the catastrophe, when most people expected him to keep quiet, Mark Gerardo did the unthinkable. He published a book, a full-length book, page by page, detailing his version of events. Not from a place of quiet or sorrow, but with a polished rather than sorry tone. He labeled it as a narrative of healing. He framed it as a reflection. But for many, it felt more like a cash grab. A man in the center of a tragic love triangle is now in the spotlight, seeking attention rather than answers. The book described his ties with both women, his lengthy marriage to Jenna, and his hidden infatuation with Meredith. Despite describing their personalities, shortcomings, and emotional struggles, he remained unaffected. It read more like a well-crafted public relations effort than a confession. He portrayed himself as someone split between two realities. The loyal spouse succumbed to temptation. The bereaved survivor who never intended for any of this to occur. But readers didn't buy it. Some others claimed that the book helped them realize what actually transpired behind closed doors. That it provided closure. It humanized the anguish. Others were less forgiving. They saw it for what it was: exploitation. One woman dies. Another person takes her own life. And the man caught in the midst decides to make their narrative into a product? A bestseller? It didn't sit well, especially if interviews followed. Talk shows, press appearances, headlines. It was evident that Mark wasn't just attempting to recover. He was developing a brand. He quickly advanced from office assistant to novelist. But what people couldn't stop wondering was this: if he genuinely felt shattered, why was he the only one benefiting from the pain? Because this narrative was more than simply about sadness. It was also a warning. A reminder that the villain doesn't always carry a weapon. Sometimes, he simply holds the pen. 2 funerals, 2 entirely different conclusions. Meredith's remains were cremated and quietly given to her family, who were left with just ashes and unresolved questions. Jenna was buried in Indiana, distant from the turmoil she caused. Even in death, the narrative felt unfinished. Because there's one scene that still gives folks goosebumps to this day. Mark was meant to be there as well. Many feel he was supposed to die that night. Jenna's aim was not just to get revenge on the woman who had taken her husband, but also on the guy who had lied, misled her, and abandoned her. She was familiar with their schedule. She observed their habits. She waited for the time when they'd both be inside the home. But fate had different intentions. Meredith came first. Mark was running late, and that delay, those few more minutes, could be the only reason he is still alive. It's difficult to overlook how close he came. It's even harder to ignore the way he talks about it, as if he, too, is a victim. If he had arrived 5 minutes sooner, the narrative may have ended with more than 2 bodies. While the world grieved 2 women trapped in pain and obsession, Mark was able to continue living, writing, lecturing, and earning. He walked away unscathed. So, as people debate Jenna's mental health and Meredith's decisions, one question remains: How could he walk away from it all without a single scar? Because, in the end, only the wrong people died.